This is Susan Popoola, host of the Leading the Mosaic World podcast, with a special series on being a man in today's world. As of late, I found myself increasingly conversing with men and focusing my work on boys and men. Boys and young men trying to find their place in the world, emerging leaders in the workspace, established leaders navigating increasingly complex environments, and successful men missing a sense of real fulfillment. It all points to the question of what it means to be a man in today's world. A question fundamental to men, for gender harmony, and for a Mosaic world in which everyone is valued for who they are and what they have to offer to the world around them. Join me as I explore this subject with a rich diversity of men, and women too. Thank you. This is a special series of the Leading the Mosaic World podcast on men in today's world. My guest today is Keith Howells, a leader, engineer and entrepreneur. Keith has spent decades navigating high-stakes environments and guiding others through complex change. As a chartered engineer and fellow of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers, he is currently the founder of Project for Learning Lab, having transitioned from managing large, complex engineering projects at Rolls-Royce to helping world-class organizations transform and improve the way they work to enhance their performance and outcomes. A former school governor, chair, he's also a business mentor, deeply invested in coaching, leadership, and human behavior. On a more personal level, Keith is also a great associate and friend who in many ways is one of the people that is instrumental to this series on men, as he is one of the contributors to my book, Male Perspectives on the Value of Women at Work. Keith, thank you very much for being my guest today.
Oh, you're welcome. And what a great book, by the way. My privilege.
Yes. I still remember that conversation. Funny enough, we were talking, we did the interview during lockdown, and we had such an extensive conversation. And I got to the stage where I was thinking that probably we've covered all that there is to cover. And I don't know whether you sensed it, because you said to me, Susan, there's more, because you must have thought she's about to round things up, and I still have a lot more to say.
I remember feeling mentally exhausted after the conversation, which I guess is a good sign.
Well, it was because you have a lot of depth. You have so much to offer. You are one of those, I could say, understated people who you're just quietly in a space in a room. You speak when you've got something to say, but otherwise you're just quietly there, and people don't recognize how much knowledge and experience and care you have for the world and people around you.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. That's, I guess, probably a fair statement, but yeah, I'd never really thought of it.
That's why you're in my orbit, inviting you back and other people around you as well. To get a conversation really and truly started, that person that you are, I'm curious as to how you became that person. So where were you born? Where were you raised? What was life like for you growing up?
Yeah. I'm glad you clarified the question, because the first part was quite abstract. So I have no idea. So I was born in Swansea in South Wales quite a long time ago. And Swansea is a sort of quite a working class area, quite industrial, certainly in the main parts of it. So my mum and my dad both worked hard, and sort of they would be described as grafters, I think. So my mum had 2 jobs when she needed to. My dad would continually work different shift patterns as required, and he started work at 15, having left school with minimal qualifications. And he talked quite frequently about 40 years of work, 50 years of work. So the sort of work ethic, I think, in me came from that. But also, I think growing up in that area at that time, and maybe it's no different today, but there was a sense of community and family and proximity where all of the family were close. Various members of the family might be doing well, some might be struggling, but there was a tight family network and quite a caring network, I would say. When I look back now at the sorts of professions or the jobs that both my parents and my family had, they were caring professions, and in later life for my brother now, teaches or he's in education. And whereas I went into this, what's often seemed as cold, hard engineering world, and I did that just because I liked solving problems. So I think the older I've become, the more reflective I've become, the more I've been able to understand quite how much I've been influenced and quite how much my values and worldview have been shaped by the context within which I grew up, and how it maybe helped me understand a little bit what's important to me, or how it is to act in a particular way, why it's important to look out for people, just different things, I think, that when you look back, you can stitch together in some coherent sort of narrative.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I guess, as you said, a hardworking parent, and that's both parents, hardworking parents. And I'm going to add grandparents as well, because I remember you talking about your grandmother, how she had studied and almost like what equates to an engineering course and did welding. So I remember that. But hardworking community people, as I said, whatever they're doing, looking out for each other. And even though you've gone into what people might call the hardcore, as I said, engineering, you're still that caring person, and that those values have driven you as you've gone forward.
I think so. And I think, you think about every kind of organization and group, they're all made up of people. So whatever the topic is, the human factors and how we interact with each other and how it feels to be in that group are at least as important, much, much more important probably than what it is we're doing together.
Yeah. And just bringing the whole thing of gender into that, because when I work with talk to men and even boys, you might remember the youngest person was 16, and he mentioned that as boys they're taught not to show any emotion other than anger. And so you constantly hear about men, the man up, men not being expected to I emotion. Was it like that for you when you were young, or what was it like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think on reflection, I was blessed by having role models, male role models that taught me a lot without me noticing they taught me a lot. And I wasn't always grateful for that in the past, but with time comes gratitude, I think. So my grandparents, my granddads, both of them, both very quiet men, but also very kind and very funny. And I've come to notice and recognize that, and I can see that shaped me. But also I think there's an expectation that they'd be the providers in terms of they'd go to work and they would bring the money in. And both my grandmothers at that point, yes, they were working, but it wasn't work that was going to bring in enough to sustain the household, and they had other things that they were doing. So there's more demarcation, I would imagine, back then around expectations of roles that people might play. And I think that's quite interesting because those things were never said. They're in the ether somewhere, and you tune into something that isn't quite said or held by any individual that this is the way it should be, but there are patterns that people fell into, and I think growing up I sort of watched those patterns and absorbed them, maybe sort of gave me some models of what a man should be like, but also gave me some models, I guess, of what a man should be doing, whether those models are good or not, fit for purpose or not. But I certainly recognize that it sort of shaped my thinking around what it means to be a man.
Yeah. Can you explain those models, or at least one of those models of the expectation of what you should be like and what you should be doing? Because I guess they're two different but possibly related things.
Yeah. So if I looked at, again, I'll stick with my grandfathers. They both worked really hard. They both had jobs that were highly manual, very hard work, and they worked very long hours. I sort of recognize that I've come to absorb that. I kind of almost a part of how I value myself has been tied in the past to how hard I've worked and how much I've grafted, which sometimes is healthy and maybe sometimes isn't. But it was clear. And then one of my granddads, he had an industrial accident that meant he could no longer work. So he retired early, and possibly, well, certainly his lifestyle changed as a result, but he still retained that sort of quiet, knowledgeable, funny sort of persona, but didn't have the anchor of work to show identity. So maybe that changed. And my other granddad, who's a mechanic, who's really funny and really kind, but also really quiet and understated. I remember my vision of my granddad was one, and I'd spend quite a lot of time there whilst my mum was working. So I'd spend lots of time watching TV or sport or doing stuff or going to budget shops to try and find bargains for gadgets. He'd love to buy little gadgets that, and I remember being blown away when I went to his funeral by quite how many people turned up, and people reminiscing about their experience of him that was an entirely different circle to the circle I'd seen. I had no idea. My perspective of him was, okay, he's the guy who used to work hard, then he retired, then he sat in the corner and he'd occasionally walk his dog and he'd go out with my gran shopping every week. And this whole network of hundreds of people talking fondly about what he's done, the influence he's had on them. And it just blew my mind, just sort of totally blew my mind. I think those, on reflection, looking at that, we might have role models or strong influences and we see them from a particular lens, but then when you get the chance to peek outside that lens, you see that there's so much more richness and impact and influence that goes on. And all of us have that, I think. So probably I get from those role models a sort of work hard, do good, be kind, be funny. You don't need to be the center of attention. And it's just a way of being, right? That I think because I loved and respected both of them, you want to be more like them. And
Yeah.
I think that's...
One of the things with that, so there's your grandfather who was an engineer who I guess worked till he retired and who had the impact that he had that way. And then there was your grandfather who was unfortunately forced to retire early due to an accident. I was already thinking about how that would have impacted him, especially when I think of people that lost jobs due to deindustrialization and the impact that had on identity. And you mentioned the anchor of work that he had. So I'm just curious as to how, because there's that importance of work to us generally, but especially to men, I would venture to say. And him losing that anchor, I wonder what type of impact you observed in him, and if not him, in other people, men.
Yeah, it happened when I was very young. So it was happening around me, and I probably wasn't able to see the before and after in his case. And I think the intergenerational thing's quite interesting in that my dad worked in the same place. He sort of left school early to start working in the steelworks, which is where my grandfather worked, at the age of 15, and then sort of worked his way up. And at a time in the 70s and 80s where heavy unionization, lots of back and forth about future of steel making and all that sort of stuff. And ultimately, my dad spent at least 20 years, more than that actually, probably almost 30 years in the steelworks, and then got made redundant. And so this sort of progression from young boy almost to, supervisor and whatever in the steelworks, and then, okay, well, we don't need you anymore. Sort of, I think, severed that link with job and identity and purpose. And for him, gave him a chance to look at different things. So he went back to college and studied and got some qualifications that he didn't have when he left school. Ultimately went to university and retrained to be a probation officer. So
Completely different area.
totally different and really interesting about people orientated, helping others, rehabilitation. Yeah, life's challenging, but it doesn't have to be the end. Sort of, supporting and not quite coaching, but helping others find a path to something different. And I saw in him a change from, I'm part of this big unionized group, we're all in it together and we're polarizing against the management and the owners and the leaders, and to, okay, there's a rich tapestry in society here and not everyone gets a fair deal and not everyone finds themselves in a position where they're able to do things. So what can I do in that space? So I do think it's interesting, the exchange between the job you do, what that means for your identity, what you think that means in terms of how you show up to the world, and what it means for how you value yourself. And I've come to recognize in myself that in the past, a big part of how I've defined myself has been by what I do and the job. And I think over time, it's become less important to me to be defined in that way as I've become more confident in myself about what it is that I can bring to society or the world.
Yeah.
I don't need to hide behind titles or positions or levels.
And I'm curious about that. I mean, because I could make assumptions, because you moved from the large global, I call Rolls-Royce global, at least it's a global.
You probably should.
Yeah, global organization, global brand, prestigious, large, complex structure, all of those things, senior level within that, high profile projects and what have you. You moved from that to becoming the founder of Project for Learning, a small, but I would say highly impactful organization.
Oh, bless you.
I've visited the organization. I've met the team. I know about the work. I've met people that you work with. So I think I'm speaking from a position of knowledge. I've seen the journey. And I could assume that those are the things that have led to your transition in terms of how you thought, in terms of yourself and your identity to now. But rather than just assuming, now I've got two questions, almost like I could say, is that what led to the transition? Or I could step back and say, what was it like for you? How did you see yourself within this context of that large organization to now we're in context of a small, much more impactful organization?
Yeah. I don't know which one to answer now. Probably keep up my record and answer neither.
Well, if you answer the latter, it might begin to answer the former.
Yeah. I think looking from the outside is quite a big change to leave a job that in an organization that's incredible and highly respected, and the jobs I had, I was privileged to have them, and then to step into the unknown where, frankly, doors aren't opened for you anymore. You want to speak to someone, you can't speak to someone. You want to go somewhere, you can't. But all of those privileges that existed as being part of this thing disappeared. But it wasn't ever important to me, actually. The things that were important to me that led to the change were, could I make a difference? And could I help more people than I was helping inside the organization? And could I learn new things fundamentally? I'd sort of understood what the organization was, what the jobs were, what was possible, what might lay ahead. But I wasn't excited by that aspect of it. So I was seeking a bit more excitement and what was different. I think for me, the thing I'd always dreaded when I was working in Rolls-Royce, and I'd seen it a lot, is when people came to their retirement speech, they say, yeah, so I was there for 5 years, and then I did a little bit in that, and then I was involved a bit there for 10 years, and then I was there, and it's been great, and it's all about the people, and it's fantastic. I sort of dreaded being in a position where I'd be retiring there and saying, well, I was there for a bit and we did something, and then I was there for a bit and that was all right. It didn't feel like, at the time, it didn't feel like impact to me. I was sort of seeking something that was a little bit more than you were present while stuff was going on. And that's the symptom of being in a really massive organization where you might work really hard and do stuff, but your direct effect of what you're doing is a small part of the whole to something that's a bit more impactful. So that for me was the trigger to change, really. And I've sort of enjoyed since then the discretion to spend my time in a range of different things, but also things that help other people outside the professional networks and outside the direct course of doing business.
Yeah. And I'm just going to pivot a bit. I'm just thinking of Rolls-Royce, which is that large organization, and you're a cog within that environment. But you're also, Rolls-Royce was also very much a male-dominated organization. It might have started changing. And you mentioned the privilege of working in that space. And I'm just thinking of privilege. We often talk about men and we talk about privilege. So the privilege of Rolls-Royce, but do you also feel that you are privileged or more privileged as a man? That's a hard question in a way, but
yeah, I think so. And I think our conversation previously that led to the book sort of started me thinking about privilege, and am I privileged, and in what ways, and what is it helpful to, this probably isn't the right word, to positively discriminate or to tweak the systems and incentives in some way to change the level of inequality or the inequality of opportunity that exists between genders. And so I think, sadly, I'm still privileged. And so I recognize I have opportunities that others wouldn't get as a result of either my gender, and probably have historically. I feel like that's less so now, but maybe that's just because I've been the beneficiary of all those privileges and I don't see it. I also see on the other side, so I'm looking now for areas where I could make a difference. So, I might want to do some trustee things or non-exec directors or whatever. And so many times where I've seen an opportunity, I haven't applied for those because I don't want to take that position that could preclude someone else from either a different gender or a different race or different dimensions of diversity from having that opportunity. And so it's really a really interesting dynamic to say, when organizations say, rightly so, we welcome applications from everyone and we value diversity. Often I read that as, okay, well, I won't. And that's quite weird, isn't it? That's quite the other side of that. But I do think two things are at play. There's privilege, and then there's the other side of that. If you're acutely aware of opportunities that you've had that others haven't, then what does that mean in terms of when you want to push yourself forward? So,
and with that, I would say, if you don't put yourself forward, do you put someone else forward? Because otherwise, does it not just leave room for someone else that is equally privileged?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. So sometimes I've done that, but yeah, maybe. It's, who knows? But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's being this ripple in the pond, isn't it? There are things you can do, but you also recognize that there are things you can't change as much as you'd like to. So you can only do the right things, or the things you feel are right, consistently, and hope that has an effect. And I've come to recognize as well that you won't always get feedback on doing the right things, and sometimes the right things will feel hard or unnatural, and you might not be sure that you're doing the right thing, and you might be uncertain. And often when you're doing those things, you don't get reinforcing feedback that encourages you to do that, or certainly not at the time you're going through it. You get it further down the line in retrospect when someone says, I'm really glad you did that. That really made a difference. You're like, oh, I wasn't sure that was a good thing to be doing, so thank you.
And sometimes you just trust the process. But still on that question of privilege and the assumption of male privilege, and I specifically say the assumption because it does exist in some ways. It might not be equal to all men. You've mentioned race, but there will also be other factors. And like you mentioned, growing up in a working class environment, I've heard when people talk about privilege, people will say, well, okay, I'm struggling, should I say, to make it, a man struggling to make ends meet. There are not many jobs in my environment. And how can you say I am privileged compared to a woman of color or what have you, who's got a high profile job? Do you have a response to that?
It's nuanced, polarizing, and inflammatory, isn't it? This stuff, you know, we all have a right and an obligation to feel however we want to feel about things. And I think it's so easy to believe that there's a set of expectations on you about how things should be. And if you believe that, it's likely that you're going to be measuring yourself against that and finding yourself somehow deficient. And then there are two ways to go with that. It's either my fault or it's someone else's fault in society. If it's my fault, then I might get down on myself. If it's someone else's fault, then I might be angry or bitter about things that haven't come my way that maybe I feel entitled to. And I think when you go down that route and then you look at others who do have stuff, then you're probably also projecting on why have they got stuff when I haven't got stuff? Does that make them more worthy than me? Or is this... And it leads to more polarization, I think. And I just don't think it's helpful in any way to be trying to score around who's got what and should they, and, you know, and am I worse off than you or you? Because there are so many dimensions to it. Clearly, it's not just economic dimensions, or it's not just positional dimensions or responsibility. So it becomes a really polarizing and inflammatory debate, I think. And I'd much rather see a society where the opportunities exist and there are fewer barriers to pursuing them.
Yeah. And I actually, as you're talking out, I do hold myself responsible in many ways for bringing in the whole question of privilege. But it's something real that is spoken about that needs to be discussed at times, whether this is the right time or not. But I then think for a young man, working class or otherwise, who's struggling, who is faced with challenges, whatever those challenges may be, what would you say to him, regardless of privilege? Do you have a message for especially the younger man trying to navigate in today's world?
I sense like it's harder than it's ever been. And maybe that's right. I'm not wrong. But I think it's really, there are so many things in the world that encourages people and young people to look outside and look at some models of what good things should be and how you should be aspiring towards those things. And much better, I think, to think about what it is that will make you content. What are the things that you enjoy, you take comfort in? What are the things you think you need to move from beyond whatever state you feel you're at now? And what might be possible inside you to start to move towards there? Because it's so easy to expend energy on thinking about what you don't have and how you might fall short of some benchmark that someone else defines for you, that it really misses on the uniqueness and the value of who you are and what you might bring to the world, and how you might step into that space, because we find ourselves in positions as a result of loads of small things, one big magic bullet. And I do think for young people growing up today, and I see it in my children, there are a huge set of expectations that they perceive are placed upon them, and very few voices in the external world that say that's probably not where you need to be thinking. So they grow up with lots of pressure, and at a time where their sense of self is really not well formed. And so you've got these high external benchmarks and maybe a sense of where you are not really in a good place. And so that gap feels massive, and it's unnecessary stress for everyone brings something unique to the world, right? Everyone's got a contribution and a difference to make. And I think having expectations out there about how you should be, how you shouldn't be, just dim that. they dim the possibility that that's going to be true.
Yeah. When you mentioned everyone has something to offer, that I smile because it's like that human value, a mosaic world, everyone has a place, something to offer. But then I think about those expectations, those pressures, where are they coming from? I mean, because you said it feels as if there's much more of it now than there were years. So where are they coming from?
Who's orchestrating it?
Yeah. Is it parents or where is it coming from?
And I think the truth is that there are so many channels that get information and messages into an individual now. So many media outlets, so many websites, so much social media, so many visual images, videos, narrative, so much fast news, so much stuff that all comes into all of us every day. And then we've got to form our sense of what that is, what that means, where we sit relative to that. And so I think that's changed massively in terms of the amount of imagery and messaging that an individual receives is vast, more vast than it's ever been. So the opportunity to see loads of things that either make you feel good or more likely make you feel deficient in some way, I think has never been bigger. And that's why I think the work that you're doing is so important, because where is the counter voice to that that says, what is it that's brilliant about you? What is it that you love? What is it that you could do? What is it that really is valued and the world needs right now? Where is that? When you look at those channels and the messaging coming down those channels, it's rarely that. So that can be drowned out and lost in this sea of, benchmarks and expectations.
Yeah, and thank you very much for the acknowledgement. Then I would agree there is so much. I mean, people talk a lot about the manosphere, and I think sometimes that might even start with a positive message. And then as you get closer, then as you said, it's all those things about expectations and how you should be and what you should do, and the forced messaging of how I got here without talking about the challenge and all of those things. And as you said, there has to be the counter. And I'm hoping that in some ways, okay, this is a deep conversation, but at the same time, I hope that these conversations and conversations that young people as others can listen to and actually have a counter, should I say, message. And with that in mind, you mentioned you've got sons, and I guess
Only one.
just one. And I guess just like every other young man, when I say young man, because we're talking predominantly about men and boys, if he's not now, at some point he's going to be faced with all that messaging, social media, peers, what have you. What are you doing, or what do you think you would do to counter that and then better enable him to focus on self and what he wants to be rather than what other people say, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, we have that conversation a lot. He's 17 now and just thinking about what he wants to do next and what his future direction might be, and he it's so difficult, I think, at that age to not see things and then judge yourself against those things. And we have a conversation a lot about what is it that he enjoys and what is it that he's good at, and how could he do more of those things, and would he prefer to do those things, or would he prefer to be like these other things that he sees? And we kick that around a little bit and give him the space to help him work through that a little bit. And he's privileged to have someone in his life that helps him do that. As clumsy as I'll be around that, at least I give him the space to do that, and he takes the invitation to talk about it, which is great. I'm conscious not everyone has that. And the other thing I take comfort in is where we started, in that I used to get really stressed as a parent about how is it that I might show up, and what is it that I'm teaching my children, what is it that I actually need to do, and you exude your values and through your behaviors what you deem to be important and how you feel they are in people, your children in this instance, then assimilate that, right? You know, so I've become, and it was the same with my grandparents and my parents. You get models and you get patterns of behavior, and yes, you can evaluate whether they're helpful to you or not, but you get these things. So he's privileged and I'm privileged that we have the space to be able to talk about that, and I'm conscious that others don't. And I think there's always safety in numbers, isn't there? So as humans evolved, we're safer in the group than outside. So if we're feeling unsafe, or if we don't have the privilege that I've just described, then we're going to try and associate with a group that makes us feel safe. And sometimes that group is going to have values that we're in total sync with, and sometimes they're not. But the power of being in a group, I think, is bigger than the stress that people might feel with slightly misaligned values. And I think that speaks to things like the manosphere and these groups that progressively have views that are challenging, certainly to me, but I understand why young people are associated with them, because they're looking for belonging and meaning and value within a social circle, and we all need that somewhere, somehow. I think the counter to that is how we have positive role models, and maybe it needs to be male men for young men to help them explore how you can navigate this world that places expectations or role models on them that probably aren't helpful.
So I'm smiling because I'm thinking the number of things. So first and foremost, there's something big about conversation and creating spaces for boys and young men to be able to express themselves, to be who they are, and to be encouraged, supported in understanding this is who I am, because you don't know when you're young, but support them in understanding who they are, what they enjoy, provide outlets for them to be able to explore those things and support those things and be those things, and see where they feel that full sense of satisfaction in of themselves. So there's something about that. Great if you are in a family where you have that naturally, even just like looking up to a person and hearing them and thinking about it, and then the conversations. But if you don't have that, we need outlets outside of family and spaces. And I'm still a strong believer that we all have a part to play in that. The brief story that contextualizes that for me is, I remember talking to a group of guys, older guys, well, I say older, but my age, and they were talking about the behavior of young boys and this and that. And I'm like, well, they walk past you, they don't say hello or anything. And I'm like, well, did you say anything? And it's like, no, it's not their responsibility to some extent. And then it's like, oh, well, they're doing this, and it's like they're in a group. And I was like, well, did you say hello? I mean, and then there's the feedback that, well, I can't just go up to them and start talking to them. And I'm like, well, but you could, even if it's from across the road, just give a nod of a head and then a hello, and almost build a relationship that way, just by that gentle acknowledgement of them in their humanity, rather than just looking at them as aliens. And I was thinking, I'm reminded of that as you're talking, reminded of, yes, we're currently doing research on the experience of boys from their perspective. And then that determines whether it's mentoring programs or what have you, which you will most definitely be hearing about.
You made me think as well. I don't think it washes out for quite a long time either. In that, you know, the suicide rates amongst men under 40, you know, it's a big cause of death in men under that age, and yet society often projects men as confident and brash and outgoing and masculine and whatever that means. And yet these two things sit side by side, right? And it's about, I think, as much as anything, not having that space to talk about the things that are on our mind without fear of judgment, and to go along not having those outlets through that age. So I find that sort of contrast really interesting isn't the right word, but it speaks to a difference between the view of confidence and how things really are. And I think at the nub of that is what you describe around connections.
Yeah. Because you do hear about the loneliness, and there are all those. I think we still do it with young people, young boys. The message of, "Oh, just man up, you're a man." Ha ha ha! You showed some form of emotion, or you're definitely not crying in front of your friends unless they are real friends, and all of those things. And so there is the bottling of things up inside, and then when you can't cope, then I guess what's your outlet when you no longer feel able to cope, when you don't feel valued for who you are? And so the more I have conversations, the more I observe, I can begin to understand those things. And that leads me to a question as to, beyond the outward image of men and what they might be faced with, what would you say people need to know about men that we're not really aware of? And I guess that's typically us as women. What is it that we don't get about men?
Men are human too. And I think often I see they presume confidence means inner confidence, and I think often, well, like all humans, men are uncertain and don't know what to do and are scared sometimes, and don't often, I think the external displays of strength and confidence come from a place of insecurity. But often they're viewed as, right, okay, really got this stuff together. But often it's someone scared, or someone dealing with trauma, or someone trying to gain control of stuff. So I do think there's a lot of misallocation of traits that we believe are desirable in men, that manifestations of insecurity and things that sit underneath it. And I think it's often misallocated. Often I've seen in programs that seek to drive more diversity or equality or inclusion, they often start from a place of, yes, privilege, but these people are, they've got it all buttoned up, they've got it all together, and we're not quite as strong as that. And it's a total misunderstanding, I think, of the behavior that's seen. And I think the route to fixing that is to provide the space for them to open up and talk. But it's often misallocated as strength and confidence. And if you could just tone it down a bit, give space for others to, and it's a response to something that's not right inside.
Yeah. And but there is, I guess, if I say, and I almost hesitate to say that, which actually plays into the narrative, but not all men have everything all together.
I'd say most don't.
Yeah. And I just said not all, just to leave space for those that want to say, nah, I'm all right. So I just leave space for them. So a lot of men don't have everything all together, probably struggling. And I just think of that duck paddling underwater and you can't see it. It's still the swan, so to speak, because head held up high, but really struggling beneath. So there's almost a need to acknowledge that, to create spaces for that, whether that's men's groups or even whether that's just us. And I say us as females, giving room for that in our dialogue, in our interactions, and just being aware, because often we think of the need for men to support others, the need for men to be allies, because we're thinking in line of that whole thing of men privilege, men have got it all, men have had it for all this time, so now it's time for them to support others. And I say, actually, recognizing men's challenges and supporting them actually is better for them to be able to be their full best selves, but it's also then better for us as well.
I think that's right. I think that's right. It's easy to follow a narrative and then to say, okay, these are strong, they've had it good for a long time, and therefore they need to stay strong, but give up this space. And that might well be true. And it's also true that there's probably deep insecurities, anxiety. They haven't got that stuff together. And what you're seeing is a manifestation of that. And the antidote to that is not to pursue particular directions of travel. So, but it starts with dialogue, doesn't it? The space to say, this is where I'm at, where are you at, what can we do about that? And there aren't that many spaces in the world that give you the time and space and the safety to do that. And particularly when the pace of change or the perceived pace of change outside is big. This is happening, you must think this, here's a value statement, why aren't you doing that? If only you did this, your life could be... It's like, well, whoa. Where's the space to just explore some of that and where I'm at?
And I think we can do that in big ways, like the groups, the support group or the men's groups. And we can even do that on the in the little ways. I mean, there's everything in between, down to the little ways of the how are you? And the how are you with eye contact, and that says, I really want to know how you are. And how are you a second time if the response doesn't seem to connect? I mean, doing that without being a pest, but at the same time, having that follow on. And I think even there's a follow on even within the workplace. I'm referring back to that original conversation for the value of women at work. And I still remember you mentioned that you would be working on different projects, and then typically you'd go from one project to the next without pause. We've done this, the next, the next, the next. And then there was a lady that joined your team, and it would be, you finished one piece or one project and you'd be about to go on to the next. And she would say, oh, hang on a minute. How do you feel? How did that go? What worked well and what not? I don't know whether you can remember that.
Vaguely. My memory's shocking, but yeah, it's not out of family with something I would have said.
Yeah, because I remember you said that there was the sense with that we're at work. We're talking about how we feel for and everything else, but then actually you realize actually we can do this, and it's of value, and it helps make the next thing even more effective because you've taken account, you've taken the time to reflect. You feel seen in that. Does that resonate?
It does, and it made me think about where I started this conversation. My work ethic was really big, so the thing that my default in work is, right, do more, don't stop, keep going. And then having someone with a different perspective say, how are you feeling about that, is a different thing. You know, it's a different dynamic that makes the whole thing richer, but it's not my default position. So then when that space is opened up and we can talk about it, there's richness from that. But yeah, it's sort of interesting when you move from automatic to something slower as a result of someone's different perspective or different values. And I think that's richness. Would
you say smarter? Well, that might be a leading question.
But is the woman smarter than me? Is that what you...
No, smarter in terms of when, yes, you're still working hard. Because I almost feel as if it's part of what you bring for Project for Learning, where you're supporting all different organizations in terms of organizations that are doing well, but you're helping to review and look in how they can improve and become smarter. And I'm just wondering how much of that you carry through from in terms of that learning.
Yeah, loads. It's easier to see things in others than in yourself. So we have the privilege of working with organizations where you look at them and you think, if only they did this or that, or why aren't they thinking about how it feels to work here and what that means for their outputs? And then occasionally we'll just go, hang about, are we doing that? As much as we strive to do things that we're advocating others do, occasionally you just look and go, And I think it's easier to see challenges and things in others that exist in yourself, but you don't see it. And I think, again, that's a benefit of having the time and the space to reflect some of that stuff and explore, and whether that's professional or personal, I think that's key for making sense of things and just crystallizing what's important. to you based on where you are right now.
You mentioned the evolution for you from earlier days now, how things have evolved over time. What makes you feel most content these days in this current time?
It's a really interesting question. For me, it's still helping others. It's still that moment where I know that what I've done or we've done with each other has made a difference, and we've named it. So sometimes I know that something's different as a result of what we've done together, but it's never named or stated. The times I feel most content, and it's interesting to get the external validation, is when we look back together and say, that was really good, wasn't it? We made a real difference there, didn't we? And so the combination of the outcome, the progression, and the journey together, even though it might have been really difficult and challenging at times, that's the stuff that makes me really content.
Yeah. And what you do well from a work perspective. But what about at a personal level? Because you are a whole person.
No.
And as you said, yes, as you said, I mean, just thinking back to the beginning of the organization, of coming from a family of people that grafted hard and worked hard, and that's the ethos that you carried. And then getting to a stage where you recognize that's not everything.
Yeah.
What, as a whole person, more holistically, beyond work and having an impact, makes you feel happy and fulfilled?
Yeah, I've moved to a state where that's more important and more balanced now. I've sort of come to reflect that for almost 30 years, I've just been like working crazy to drive this work ethic to be fine. And then recognize the collateral damage of that in terms of relationships outside work. And not that they've all been catastrophic, but there's an impact when you focus in one area and not the other. So for me now, contentment really comes from the time spent with others doing meaningful things. And meaningful might not be change the world, but meaningful might be just sitting outside for 10 minutes, breathing, and talking about how our day's been, or just seeing some joy in people, or just, so we're here for a finite time, aren't we? And we have impacts on everyone we interact with, and we have a choice about what that impact is. I've sort of come to recognize in myself that I love spending time with people and just having fun and just having deeper conversations and just enjoying where we're at right now. And for far too long, I'd been chasing something that was never achievable and was damaging all the things that gave me contentment and meaning in life. And I think that's a nice place to reflect from.
Thank you. And more or less concluding, that's almost you to the world, so to speak, and how you engage with the world, and how recognizing that having a positive impact, whether it's in work or more broadly, spending time with people, the quality of relationship and interaction, that gives you a sense of contentment and fulfillment. But then I'm just thinking, as a man, what would you like of the world to add to you your sense of equilibrium, fulfillment, satisfaction? What can the world do for you as other men?
I think don't make assumptions. It's the labeling that I've always found challenging. You're a white man of this age, therefore, and we all do it everywhere. So we all look at things and make assumptions and then adjust our behavior. And I think when those assumptions are implicit and not explicit, I think it leads to bad things. So the world could not make assumptions and treat people as human, however they're categorized and characterized, and then deal with what's in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about holding the space, because the reality is, if I see someone that looks like you, I think that's a man, that's a white man, that's a natural reaction. But it's what I associate with that. It's been able to hold the space for that and to see what the person revealed rather than immediately jump into conclusions on the basis of what we see in front of us.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I think, well, maybe I don't know. It's easy to say white man, privileged, confident, wrong.
Isn't it interesting that you almost put confident and then specifically wrong at the end of that? That's horrible.
It's one of my favorite funny things. So many people are confident and wrong, and those are the ones often that are influential, and they lead people into places that no one benefits from.
I'm just curious as to how it feels being labelled that way.
For me personally, I like the exploration of that because it's the start of something. As long as there's some space to explore it, I love it because it's out there and we can decompose some of that stuff. And because at the heart of it, the thing that matters most is you're human and you've got these emotions and you care and we're all better together. It's can you get to that space when you've got these assumptions that surface level?
Yeah, because I think sadly we're here in the UK, we're in a space whereby things have become so polarized, at least outwardly. I mean, I want to believe that there are more conversations taking place under the surface, but it's just so polarized, so lacking in nuance. And that is not a good thing for anyone. It's not good for the person who is being labeled and judged. It's not even good for the person that is making the judgments because they're not getting the best of people.
And so quick as well, here's something happened, judgment, move on, something, judgment, move on, and of course, all those things wound people and they might carry the trauma associated with that stuff for quite a long time and it might never come out.
And that trauma has an impact not just on the individual bearing the trauma, but on people around them as well.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on another project.
Yes. How do people contact you? Because we've touched in broad terms on Project for Learning, but how do people, Project for Learning, how can it help people? How can they get in touch with you?
So they can get in touch with me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way. Or send a pigeon, but that will take forever. So it's just not robust. Let's go with LinkedIn. If you go to project4learninglab.com, there's a whole bunch of stuff on how we help people.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed having a conversation with you, as always.
Yeah, my pleasure. I hope it's useful to someone somewhere.
Thank you for joining me for today's conversation. I hope you found it insightful. Get in touch and let me know what you think, or if I or any of my guests can be of support to you. Until next time, this is Susan Popoola, working towards the creation of a Mosaic World. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Leading in the Mosaic World podcast. Do visit our website at www.mosaicworld.live to find out more about what we do and how we can be of support to you. Alternatively, connect with me, Susan Popoola, spelt Popoola, on LinkedIn, and let me know what you think of the podcast. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, give it a first-class rating, and tell everyone you know all about it. Thank you.